Hi everyone. We'll just give it a minute, I think, while everybody joins. We're expecting a few more, Lachlan, I think, so we'll just hang on a second. Okay, I think we will try and make a start because it is a very rainy October, 7 o'clock. Thank you, all of you, so much for joining. What we hope will be a really positive, quite focused event. So, promise you'll all be disappearing by 8 o'clock this evening. And again, thanks for joining. This is an event focused on launching 3 guides, which my colleague Lachlan's going to talk about in just a second. But to start, my name is Hugh Ellis, and I'm Director of Policy at the TCPA. And just to say a quick word about the TCPA as well before we start, it's an organisation which has been around about 125 years. And you might be wondering why we're interested in practical hope and community development. All I would say is it's always been part of our DNA. We share one unique characteristic, which was that we built or helped build Letchworth Garden City, which was an entirely cooperative, bottom-up, community-led community of 35,000 people, which is pretty extraordinary and sometimes forgotten. I think part of our DNA, therefore, is that people are a solution and they're not a problem. Quite a lot of our work is quite challenging because at the moment we're focused on some things that come out of Whitehall that assume people are basically problems. We absolutely believe that if we're going to make progress on so many issues in difficult times, we have to invest and enable, support, recognize and celebrate what's happening at community level. It is the glue that's holding many of the communities that we know well together. And very often all of that stuff happens actually despite government, not because of it. So next slide, please. So we're just going to talk quickly through the agenda today. I've introduced myself and then we're going to have some presentations from some fantastic set of speakers. I've given them all a gentle 3-line whip to be quite brief, talking about various aspects, I guess, of their work on the issues that we're going to talk about with the guides. But before we get into that, then there'll be an opportunity for Q&A. So if you want to put questions in to the Q&A function, please do. Be really interesting to explore them, and we'll spend the sort of last 25 minutes of the session running up to 8 o'clock, hopefully dealing with them. But I'm just going to introduce Lachlan, who's going to really quickly run through the guides to say thank you to him and the rest of the TCPA team for putting them together. So let's have a quick look at the guides themselves.
Thanks, Hugh. So just to give a little bit of an introduction to the project, this is the second year of our Practical Hope project, and it's really about creating a collection of inspiring case studies to showcase the work that community groups are doing to create kind of positive change in their local areas. And this year we wanted to focus on climate adaptation work in local areas, and we've chosen 3 topics. So why Practical Hope? Our values are really built on a practical ideal of a utopian society, which found form in the Garden City movement and the garden cities that were built in the 1920s and 30s. And so having these guides which can make a practical kind of difference to people's lives, and showing them how they can use the planning system and other means to engage in climate change related topics. So the first guide is about flood risk, and it's designed to support community action, showcase the kind of positive work that communities are doing. Communities often know from direct experiencing how flooding can affect their local area and how important it is to have the right input on what happens locally and how funding is spent. And across the country, communities are building their knowledge of flood management and the planning system and how to influence that. And from writing a neighborhood plan and commissioning flood risk assessments for sites to promoting grey water harvesting and even developing attenuation ponds and leaky dams to create natural flood management, there's really a wealth of things that communities can do to work together on flood risk. The next guide is about overheating, and we're going to hear a little bit more about this from some of our brilliant speakers. This guide shows how communities can work together to support the most vulnerable to overheating risk, for example, living in top floor and south-facing flats. Community groups are well placed to come together and through hands-on action transform existing and new places to make them more resilient to future heat waves. As so many of our homes and public spaces are really quite poorly equipped for new higher summer temperatures. And we were so impressed by some of our case studies, including work by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, which spurred Southwark Council to commit £1 million to address overheating in its area. And also in Southwark, the Appleby Blue case study has just been awarded Britain's top prize in architecture for its innovative design approach. And then finally, for now, we looked at retrofit, and retrofitting Britain's aging housing stock is just such an urgent challenge, but success depends on the meaningful involvement of communities. Community groups can build trust and confidence for people to access this funding, ensuring that schemes respond to local needs. Given the challenges with recent government funding programs, however, this guide demonstrates how communities can enable retrofit solutions that go beyond individual homes and make that bigger impact. And we were particularly inspired by the kind of vitality of the community retrofit sector in this country when researching these case studies. There's a really strong entrepreneurial spirit. People have set up organizations like Retrofit Balsall Heath in Birmingham, the Brighton Energy Co-op, and the Owen Square Park Community Energy Project in Bristol. And there's really a lot of audacious attempts to change the narrative and rethink energy supply through community interest companies, as well as building networks to affect change. So that brings me to our first speaker, Maddie Jennings, who's the head of policy and communications at the local trust. And she's going to tell us just a little bit of kind of scene setting about the context for community action to change neighborhoods.
Hi, thank you, Lachlan. And thank you for having me along to this. It's a great opportunity to share some of what we at the local trust have learnt about how to support communities to take actions on their own priorities and to sort of bring forward real change. And so probably useful if you know a little bit more about local trust and what it is that we do. So we are a time-limited trust set up by the National Lottery in 2012 to deliver something called the Big Local programme. And if you've heard of either local trust or Big Local, it's more likely to be Big Local because you may well have a Big Local area on your patch. And what Big Local is one of the biggest sources of funding for community development sort of ever created outside of the state. So it's the largest single endowment the National Lottery Community Fund has ever made. And it is the biggest non-state investment in community-led neighbourhood renewal. So any sort of precursors of its type would be things like the New Deal for Communities, which was very much government driven. And the thing about Big Local is that it's an experiment in giving communities free rein. Broadly speaking, 150 areas were given 1 million to spend over 10 years on whatever it was that they felt they wanted to do. So communities have full decision-making power when it comes to the funding and to working out what solutions to the problems they've identified are appropriate for them and for their area. So it's long-term, providing certainty of funding and continuity over 10 to 15 years. It's resident-led, so I am head of policy at Local Trust, but the vast majority of my colleagues work on the delivery side, supporting residents and communities to do what it is that they want to do. So supporting them with guidance, supporting them with specialist expert knowledge on things like retrofit and asset transfers and that type of thing. And supporting them also with, I suppose, the day-to-day of community decision-making and deliberation, which, even in the best of worlds, will mean conflict. And we're rather positive about that conflict because we think of it as being very generative and really producing some of the best ideas and the greatest likelihood of consensus in the long term. It's non-prescriptive. So as I said, we enable residents to spend on their own terms and in their own time. It's patient and not judgmental. So it's an opportunity to learn, to make mistakes, as I said, resolve disagreements, and it's accompanied by this support. And what we've learned over the last sort of 10 to 15 years of delivering the program is that it works. Basically, you can just hand over power and resource to communities, and with the right support, a lot can get done. And in terms of sort of what that means, we've had all sorts of projects. So some of you will no doubt have heard about Ambition Lawrence Weston, which is our project in North Bristol. And they rather brilliantly invested their funding in developing the first entirely community-owned wind turbine in the country, which is now producing, I think, about £80,000 a year, which is being reinvested back into the community. Their initial plan was about cost of living and energy bills, and not really thinking about climate. That kind of awareness and understanding came later. A typical big local will have focused on activities involving health and well-being, encouraging physical activity, supporting positive mental health, improving access to food, and that's come along with a lot of greening and interesting use of shared green space. There has also been a major sort of engagement with civic life, and over 6,500 big local volunteers have contributed to delivering projects over the last decade. And 20% of those people involved in Big Local had never volunteered before. So it's created this kind of pipeline into community activity, which is so important when it comes to thinking about who are the people that are going to be delivering the guides that we'll be talking about later on in the webinar. And then there's the environmental side of things, sustainability and improved environment. And over 64% of big local areas have carried out specifically environmental projects, ranging from recycling and footpath creation to energy generation, and demonstrating strong community involvement in sustainability efforts. One of my favourite stories on this point is Windmill Hill Big Local, which is based just outside on the edge of Runcorn. And it's a sort of a rather utopian, I think, 70s era estate that was built in a woodland and didn't quite work out the way it was anticipated, because the woodland became a major hotspot for fly tipping kind of from all over the northwest. And what Windmill Hill Big Local did was take over the refuse collection contract for the Forestry England had, and they took it on themselves. And almost overnight, the woodland went from being just awash with old fridges and litter to being really clear. And I can attest to that myself, because I recently went on a visit, and it's a wonderful place to spend some time. And it had really been the bane of many residents' lives up till that point. So again, I just would really want to take this opportunity to emphasize how much can be done by communities, and how a little support goes a long way, and guidance is all important, because communities are often really willing to try new things and get things done, but the how to and where to start is really essential. And on that point, if colleagues at TCPA won't mind, I will plug that the Learning from Big Local website is due to launch in January, and that will have a profile on each of the 150 areas, what they did, what the challenges were, how they overcame them, what their great successes were, as well as research articles on some of the themes that I've discussed already this evening, and so much more. So it's going to be a really great resource, and I hope that you'll all be Googling Learning from Big Local come January. I think that probably is my time up, and I'm very conscious of obeying Hugh's orders on that. So I'll hand back.
Madeleine, thank you so much for that. I'm really looking forward to that website launch and all the learning that's captured there. I'm sure it's going to be a fantastic opportunity for communities. So thank you again for all those opening comments. I'm going to welcome Tracey Garrett, who's Chief Executive of the Flood Forum. Welcome, Tracey, and to say to everyone, again, you're joining, I think, from a phone in a Premier Inn. So living your best life.
Living my best life,
So
absolutely.
Tracey, you're going to talk to us a bit about community-led work around flood defence.
Thanks, Hugh. So as Hugh says, my name is Tracey Garrett, and I have the privilege of being the CEO at the National Flood Forum. We're all about flooded people, making sure that they're heard and that they're able to influence their future. The forum was set up in 2002 by people in Bewdley who believed that by working collectively and in partnership with others, that was the best way to actively reduce their flood risk. They soon discovered that many other communities across the country were facing the same challenges, and by sharing their experience and determination, they secured some seed funding and the National Flood Forum was born. Today, our team of specialist flood engagement officers work tirelessly across the country, supporting people and communities affected by flooding. For those of you who don't know us, we work for and with people who flood and those at risk of flooding. We have a website with tons of information about flooding on it. We have a helpline which takes around 1,000 calls a year. It focuses on PFR, insurance, mortgages. We even take calls from people who realise they are about to flood right now. We have recovery services, which is where we will take the trailer into a community that has recently flooded, open the door and welcome people in. Our longer term work is our flood action group work, and this sees us act as an independent organisation to support communities to set up a flood action group and work with other agencies to create a flood action plan. We carry out policy influencing work at a national level, and we're the Secretariat of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Flooding and Flooded Communities, which enables us to support MPs to support their constituents and takes community voices right into the heart of government. Every day we see flooded communities working together, sharing their expertise, their knowledge and their passion. I'd like to share with you now some of our work on the London Community Flood Action Group project. The project was born out of two major flood events in the summer of 2021. It's a 5-year project working with Thames Water and across different London boroughs. It's an innovative and new way of working in London, and the project is creating flood action groups across different boroughs. We've got more groups coming on board as the project progresses, and as we progress, other groups become more self-sustaining. The aim is to really develop a truly community-led approach where communities are listened to, they're valued, and they're supported in identifying solutions that might work for them in their area. We find too often that the community voice is lost, and with that you lose expertise, experience, goodwill and motivation. The ultimate aim of the London project is to build collaboration across the city to enable communities to have a say in their flood risk and to help them to influence their flood outcomes. The project should lead to the creation of a pan-London flood forum, which will see members of the community acting at a strategic level and making their voices heard in that arena. This is a street in a London borough in 2021. Many of you will recognise this as your own experiences. Almost half of the properties experienced internal flooding on this street. The residents, with the support of the NFF, came together to form a flood action group. And through the group, the community came to understand more and more about the flood risk management world. And they started to organise their flood-related issues into categories. They developed a flood action plan, which was focused on the areas of concern they had or the ideas that they had. And they began to work with all the different agencies and began building a relationship with those different agencies. And from that partnership came two strong ideas, which have helped to mitigate some of their flood risk. The first idea was the water butt project. So after discussions at the flood action group meetings, it became really apparent that the surface water issue was being compounded by runoff from roofs. This understanding was taken by the group, and it helped them to write a proposal for a community water butt scheme, which they presented to the Borough Climate Action Team. This enabled the group to access funds from a different funding pot. This led to 500 water butts being installed as part of phase 1. And due to the success, it was extended to a phase 2, which led to a total of 1,000 water butts being installed. That diverts more than 150,000 litres from the sewers during each rainfall event. The community communication channels were used to get the message out, and this was a key part of that was using local WhatsApp groups. This really helped to build the trust and gain momentum. In this particular project, 43% of the referrals for water butts came from word of mouth among the community. The second stream of work that was developed by one of the flood action groups was creating a community flood response plan. The plan outlines how the community will work together before, during and after a flood event, and it includes how the community will work with the borough and the emergency services. It includes things like gully monitoring, placement of flood warning signs, sharing warnings with wider communities. And working with the flood risk management teams, they've managed to secure kit and equipment to help them during a flood event. The Flood Action Group has held various community sessions where they've presented the response plan to neighbours, and they've given other residents and neighbours a chance to get involved, and in particular to sign up to the WhatsApp group so that they can have information or receive warnings or find out the latest about what's going on. But because the initiative is truly community-led, local people are able to spread the word, and that builds engagement in a way that the agencies never could. They are trusted voices within their neighbourhoods, speaking as peers rather than officials, which allows the information and ideas to flow more freely. Some of the other ideas that have come out of the London project, in particular, many groups have identified the need for SUD schemes, and they're proactively leading that process. They've identified areas and are negotiating with landowners to secure suitable sites. They've mapped the risks. They're using their own data and existing data sets to map flooding. And they're working with planning teams, clarifying permissions and consents. And they've even identified funding options, and in some cases are preparing funding bids and becoming constituted so they can receive those bids, receive those funds. This demonstrates that local people and their ideas are being taken forward, and that they are actually working in genuine partnership with relevant agencies. When we talk about resilience, we're often talking about physical measures, but as the London project and much of our work in community shows, resilience is a much wider thing. It's about genuine partnership, listening to and acting on community ideas, peer-to-peer support, and ensuring that agencies remain responsive, collaborative, and transparent. The London project really highlights how communities can harness the talents of local people and work in partnership. These communities have been working with multiple departments throughout the boroughs, such as green spaces, planning, highways, climate teams, and more. communications around the activity of the groups, such as holding the presentation sessions and using the WhatsApp chats, means that more and more of the local community know what to do and what is happening with flood risk. It's amplified messages so much further. There might be 15 people in a flood action group, but there's over 100 in a WhatsApp chat. Through their work, the communities continued to carry out opportunity mapping and identified schemes and ideas for the future. Boroughs have been able to capture information that they didn't previously have, and that's thanks to the community knowledge of their area, and this has led to a richer and more detailed data set. This project, and many like it across the country, are working towards better outcomes for people, and it's all based around partnership and using local expertise. Thanks, Hugh.
Oh, Tracey, thank you so much, and thank you for a brilliant presentation from a premier in-room. That is impressive. So I'm going to move quickly on from that example to our next speaker, and we're kind of having a sudden change of environment to address the UK's challenges with overheating. So Polly Turton, thank you so much, Head of Climate Action and Public Health at Shade the UK, which is a brilliant name for an NGO.
Thank you, Hugh, and thank you, Tracey and Madeleine, for your presentations too. So yes, I'm Polly. I'm the Head of Climate Action and Public Health at Shade the UK. I'm going to be talking through some of our work on reducing heat risk in the UK. And by the end of it, you'll realise that shade should be your go-to first consideration in terms of solving those problems. Next slide, please. So who are we? We are a community interest company working to adapt the built environment and public spaces to protect vulnerable people against a changing climate, with a particular focus on heat risk. And we are a single issue sort of community interest company, hence the name, but we realise that it's not as simple as that. And actually, by zooming in on shade and heat risk, you can't then help but discuss issues to do with flood risk, water scarcity, and retrofit to keep homes warm too. Next slide, please. Slide change, please. And the reason we exist is because it's getting hot in the UK, and it's getting hotter. We believe that there is a problem, which is health and well-being of people is being affected. And in the worst and most extreme cases, people are dying unnecessarily. We have a plan on how we are going to solve it, working collaboratively with people. And we have three main approaches. One is about creating sort of hubs of knowledge and resources and support for people to deal with overheating in their homes or their high streets or their playgrounds or schools. Working with people to fund and enable funding for projects on the ground, both for buildings and for public spaces, to adapt them to climate change. And thirdly, to drive policy change at the national, regional and local level aimed at protecting vulnerable people. And our ultimate goal is 0 deaths from overheating in the UK. And that may sound a bit dramatic. The UK is not the hottest country in the world, but we are one of the least prepared for it. And we are looking at some quite significant increases in temperatures over the coming years. It's not a far off future problem, it's happening now. Next slide, please. And here are some of those sort of statistics on the numbers of excess deaths during the heat waves during summer 2022, so 3 years ago. You might remember temperatures reached 40 degrees Celsius for the first time ever in the UK. And excess deaths means people who died from the hot weather, who wouldn't have died, if it wasn't so hot. In London alone, that summer, about 400 people died. And if we don't do anything about it, those figures look incredibly stark by the 2050s if we don't take any adaptation and resilience action. And this summer, whilst we didn't quite reach that 40-degree sort of high, we had 4 successive heat waves. And in London alone, on one of those heat waves, about 600 people died from the hot weather. So this is a serious issue, and people are really suffering and sometimes dying from hot weather in the UK. And we think that is unacceptable. And we think there's practical and hopeful ways to kind of solve these problems. Next slide, please. So in terms of people most vulnerable to heat, this diagram is intended to give you a sort of flavour of those groups of people. There are some key factors here, deprivation, the very young, the very old, people who are exposed to heat through their jobs, or perhaps they are experiencing homelessness and don't have any shade or shelter. And then people with existing health conditions, both physical and mental, or disabilities of some kind, which mean they are less able to respond effectively to the heat. Next slide, please. But even people who are not considered vulnerable usually can become vulnerable to hot weather through exposure. So here are some additional groups of people. So healthy young adults queuing up in direct sunlight with no shade or no trees can become vulnerable to heat and experience ill health and extreme health issues if not treated. Next slide, please. So we're aiming through our work to ensure most people in the UK remain heat healthy when it is hot, and at the very worst might be experiencing some heat stress, which can be managed effectively. We are trying to avoid the more severe sort of stages of the human body overheating, which are heat exhaustion and ultimately heat stroke, which is a medical emergency. So that's the link with public health and vulnerable people. Next slide, please. So here's some of our work. It's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but you can always go to our website to have a look at some of our other projects. This was a project we called 40 Degree Stories, born out of that record, 40 degrees Celsius summer in 2022. We went out into the community in the London borough of Islington and interviewed residents and community centre visitors and service users about what it was like for them during that hot weather. This was Leslie. She's a healthy older adult, but her husband has Alzheimer's. She found it incredibly challenging looking after him during that hot weather. Next slide, please. This is Cornelius. He's pretty healthy himself, but he can see that the lack of public toilets in Islington is affecting how older people are, their ability to be active and be sociable when it is hot. Next slide, please. This is Babs. You wouldn't want to mess with Babs, but she's worried about safety and security on her estate. She's afraid of leaving her bathroom window open when it's hot. Next slide, please. This is Joseph. Not only is he a resident on a housing estate in Islington, but he works as a tenant support officer. So he's really seeing some of the most vulnerable residents in the community he works in and lives in. And that top floor flat or 8th floor flat is a real problem. The higher you go and the more exposed your windows are to the sun, the more serious the issue becomes. Next slide, please. And I won't go through all the details. This is Maura. Ground floor flat, still having issues, even though she has a garden, not enough shade. Next slide, please. And this is Pamela. She was working in a paediatric children's ward at the time, and there were all kinds of problems with medicines, as well as very hot and bothered children. Next slide, please. So that summer, a lot of people were saying, what can we do about it? Our homes are overheating, what can we do? So we produced this guide, the Overheating Adaptation Guide for Homes, commissioned by the British Red Cross, who are at the forefront of dealing with that summer of heat waves. And I won't go through all of the details and all of the measures, but this is aimed to be really practical, really basic, whether you have £5 or £5,000, whether you own your home or rent your home. And yeah, if you wouldn't mind just scrolling through them, Lachlan. So they range from external shade, internal shade, passive cooling, ventilation, and managing internal heat gains or minimising them. And we are delighted that this guide has been referenced in the Practical Hope Community Guide for Overheating. And then the latest piece of work we're doing is around informing the Greater London Authority's heat risk plan for London, working with communities to understand what they want to see in it. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And this diagram here looks a bit complicated, but the thing I want you to take away from this presentation is there is planning policy in London born out of, the laws of physics, which is stating that in order to keep homes and other buildings cool, you need to limit unwanted direct sunlight, solar gains. So, and at the top of that hierarchy is, you achieve that through shade and work your way down. And then if you go to the next slide, please, it still works for the public realm. So outdoor spaces too, if you're looking to keep people cool, healthy and safe during hot weather, shade it first before you do anything else to cool it and before you do anything else to move air, within that space. And last slide, please. And I recommend this book for anyone who is interested by any of what I have just said. We didn't write it, but we think it's great and really sort of brings the points home that I've been making. Thank you, Hugh.
Thanks so much, Polly. Some of those really inspiring stories, I think, as well, really brings home the impact of what really great design and community action can deliver. So I'm just going to move quickly to our last speaker, who's Stephen Cole from the Centre for Sustainable Energy. He's going to talk a little bit about the pathway to retrofit. Stephen, over to you.
Thanks, Hugh. I suppose just quickly, for those that don't know CSE, we were founded in 1979. We're an independent national charity looking to try and tackle the climate emergency and end the suffering caused by cold homes. Next slide, if we can. So I quite like some of this, I suppose, getting people to think about climate change in our community. Sometimes it's quite intangible and can feel quite far away. But the Met Office have got a tool that you can go onto their website and you can generate climate reports for different local authorities. So that's quite helpful in terms of trying to set out some of the different considerations and how our climate might change in the coming years. And then the image on the right there is taken from the City of London Heritage Buildings Retrofit Toolkit. And I quite like that because it's just, I know we're talking about overheating and flooding, but I suppose with climate change, it just sort of, there are so many different threads to this. And I quite like this because it sort of tries to lay them out and group them together and gets us thinking. Next slide, please. So this image is it's also from the Met Office. I just quite like it because it sort of talks through what we mean by resilience. It's not just one thing or the other, so it is mitigation, adaptation, but then we're also looking to get to net zero, but then we're not forgetting things like the co-benefits and the positives that we can try and take from this. Next slide, please. So we've been working on a project in Bristol that's been it's involved working with lots of different community groups and local anchor organisations, and I suppose we've been doing some of the mapping and maybe more technical stuff behind the scenes. So one of the places where we started was mapping out the sort of local history. When was the area built? So we've been doing some work around Easton. So it's just quite helpful to go to old maps online. And yeah, actually be able to sort of map out when the different parts of it were built, which can be quite helpful. So next slide, please. We've also been mapping out a few other things. So we're quite fortunate in Bristol because we have a flood risk management website where you can map out flood risks in different parts of Bristol. And then there's also the National Flood Risk Checker, which is on gov.uk that you can look at there. And it was really quite surprising because flooding happens not just in places where you might think, such as around rivers, but there's also surface water flooding can happen in lots of other sort of urban places. And yeah, it's been interesting to sort of go through this and sort of realize that actually it affects different people to different degrees, even on the same street. And then it's also worth noting that the yearly chance of flooding at the moment seems to go up quite a lot on gov.uk. So it's just something else to keep in mind. Next slide, please. We're also fortunate again in Bristol that we've got the Keep Bristol Cool mapping tool. So this is quite nice because it sort of allows us to look at people's vulnerability to overheating in different areas, looking at different things. But I think that's already been talked about, so I don't need to go into that. But it is worth pointing out that whilst there is Part O within the guidance within our building regulations, that only covers new build at the moment, so there is nothing actually there making us look at this with the existing buildings. So maybe there's something to be done there. Next slide, please. I know we were talking about flooding and overheating, but it's also worth mentioning this. We happen to be down in the southwest, and we work in lots of places that are very exposed to wind-driven rain, and that's also something which is thankfully already covered within building regulations. It's just worth noting that that's also going to get worse, which also brings further implications for some of our retrofit decisions. Next slide, please. Part of the project, we're also mapping people's solar potential. So I think one of the things that I was quite keen to point out, that it's not always a case of funding for solar panels. Quite a lot of the homes that we look at and work on, they actually need other bits. So the home in the picture there's issues with party parapet walls, there's issues with the chimney. So just sort of trying to get us to do things in order and make sure we do our repairs and maintenance and address existing defects before we start fitting solar panels, because it's quite tricky to put scaffolding on top of solar panels. Next slide, please. And then I suppose this project has also been quite nice. We've done a few different ways of working. So we've done lots of mapping. We've also done lots of resident engagement. We've had surveys. We've done some door knocking. And that's, I don't know, brought to our attention common issues. And I thought I'd just share this one here. So in lots of our terrace streets around Bristol, in the rear, they have these rear additions. They're not, I don't think they're extensions, because I think they were originally built that way. But just, it's brought to our attention, yeah, lots of these are actually uninsulated, and lots of people have reported having cold back rooms. So it's been quite nice to sort of map out common issues and then hopefully translate that into some common solutions. Next slide, please. I think this doesn't get talked about maybe as much as it should be with domestic retrofit. So when we work on listed buildings, or if we're working on non-domestic buildings, we are supposed to be considering whole life cycle impacts, so embodied and operational carbon and energy. And this is just quite a nice slide to get people talking about that. Because when we do that, it starts to change maybe some of our retrofit advice. And yeah, it's just something, it can be a bit complicated, but it's good to try and keep it in mind. Next slide, please. And I suppose just bringing it all back together. So climate resilience refers to the ability of communities, ecosystems and economies to anticipate, prepare for and respond to the impacts of climate change, ensuring they can recover from climate-related shocks and stresses. So thinking about a lot of this, I think we've come up with a bit of a new phrase. So we're not just doing a whole building approach, we're looking at a whole building approach for the whole year in a changing climate. So it's nice and simple. Next slide, please. This, I'm not going to read this, don't worry, but this is just talking about the idea of integrating all these different strands and fields and professions, so we can try and make more sort of holistic and informed and joined up decisions. So yeah, I'll let you have a read through that, but I think that's me done.
Thanks so much, Stephen, for that, and to all the presentations. It leaves me feeling uncharacteristically optimistic about what can be achieved. So maybe if our if all our speakers could turn their cameras back on, and if we could maybe lose the slide so we could see everybody in a slightly bigger scale for a second, that would be dead helpful. Please, if you've got any questions, put them in the Q&A. I can see one from Charlotte and one from Mike, so we'll come to those really quickly in the time that we have left. Charlotte, it's really nice to hear from you as well. I'm going to do a human thing that people don't do online, which is say hi, how you doing? So Charlotte's question is, how can we ensure that the opportunity, capacity and resources to carry out community projects such as those mentioned in the guides are available to every community? I'm looking for 1 sentence or 3 sentence answers, which is impossible, but I like to be impossible. And I'd add to it, what could the state do to enable this more? How could it be more helpful? But you don't all need to answer if you don't want to, but let's just start. Does anybody want to have a quick crack at that? In terms of resources, really, isn't it? Tracey?
I don't think we can ensure that at the moment. I think all we can do is keep fighting for that. I think all of us on the call would say that that is what we want, but I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there is new talk of new money for communities, which is going through local government. But fundamentally, I think it's interesting to see whether government trusts communities in the way that's been described at the very beginning. Polly.
Yeah, I mean, it is an impossible sort of question in a way, but I think what we found with particularly the 40 Degree Stories work is if you tell the stories of how the impacts are affecting people, it is a hugely persuasive and sort of more compelling way of getting support for community-led projects, or at least projects which benefit, members of, a community. So I know local authority budgets are tight, but I think, yeah, the human story about the impacts we find makes a difference to kind of decision makers.
Yeah, absolutely. Stephen, would you deal with that? And would you also deal with the question directly to you on retrofit? Is retrofit really only viable when major building work is being done?
I will try. I mean, I was in a meeting recently, and I actually got a bit of hope that there's the sort of start of some joined up thinking within government. Maybe that's 10 years too late. And I suppose the thing is, these things, yeah, they seem to take time to filter down through policies, training, education. So I suppose there is, I mean, hopefully that's where the role of organizations that are here and people that are here is to try and bring all that together a bit quicker, hopefully. And then where was the retrofit question?
Yeah, is retrofit really only viable when major work is being undertaken?
I think I have grown to hate the word retrofit because people either don't know what it is or seems to think it just involves covering buildings in polystyrene. I think there's so many little things we can do that maybe people don't consider retrofit. Just looking at the overheating and putting shades on our building, I'm probably quite sure that's not included in most people's idea of retrofit, but it's something, it's making changes to our buildings to help us deal with the changing climate. Yeah, so there's definitely bits you can do, and a lot of it is just sort of knowing our buildings, understanding our heating systems, how they work, setting them up properly. So yeah, there's lots of stuff that we can do, and there's lots of ways that we can have impacts. So yeah, just don't be put off by some of the grand sort of schemes that you see around.
Yeah, I think there's a sort of, sometimes all the techie stuff can be a bit disempowering, can't it? There are no regrets and simple actions that we can take. And in my own community, some of the most effective ways of bringing people together are about delivering those simple actions. I'm just going to take one for myself because I'm such an enthusiast for town and parish councils. I was a parish councillor at 18, which means that I am the saddest person probably on this call, and enjoyed the highs and lows of working at that level, and enjoyed very much not understanding a word town planners told us when I was in the parish council, hence my career. But I think that there's a huge opportunity with neighbourhood planning. I've become more of an enthusiast of it since the government defunded it, just on the basic principle of, kind of oppositional. They are more challenging now. Resources have been taken away for supporting them, but bear in mind there's no legal scope on a parish and on a neighbourhood plan. And so there's an opportunity to work with communities to embed some real aspirations, push the boundaries, be demanding, don't take no for an answer. But I would also say that before we finish, it's worth noting that all of this stuff, doesn't it, colleagues, comes at quite a cost for people involved in community action. And I might ask you just before we finish to reflect on how people keep their morale up in quite difficult times. Just before we come back to that, there's a question about, 1.4 million approvals for building houses, but no policy to ensure statutory adding solar rooftops plus commercial new buildings, but also green roofs. I can't say, I think everybody on this call is so heavily invested in trying to persuade government to do better. I'm absolutely convinced, by the way, that our voice is not as powerful as yours. It's absolutely essential that we drive up the standards of what we build in this country. Otherwise, of course, Stephen, we're left with a retrofit problem. I know you hate that word, but that's the challenge, isn't it? If we don't get it right for the new stuff, we're constantly having to go back and rework it. Stephen.
Yep, there's definitely a lot that could be done with new builds. I used to work building new houses for my sins. No, I just want to. I struggle with the 1.4 million new homes number just because I'm aware of how many empty homes there are. There's scary amounts in Bristol. I think there's scary amounts in Baines. I'm not sure. I'd love to sort of pull that together and build a bigger picture of a national sort of database of infrequently used or empty buildings that we could definitely do more with, and then you don't have a lot of the issues and embodied carbon that comes around building new and that sort of stuff. Yeah,
absolutely. And just as we begin to come to a close from this, I want to direct just that question. Polly, in the work you did, it was really compelling watching the voices you created. And Tracey, I know in the work that you do, you're often talking to people who are suffering the sort of mental health challenges that go with being flooded. And I know in my own community, it is sometimes desperately difficult, isn't it, to kind of keep your end up and keep going in difficult times when you're being hit by multiple things, and when sometimes people just need to come together and drink a cup of tea together. Polly, what was your experience? Do you have any reflections on how to stay positive in a difficult environment when the challenges are so big? And then I'll come to you, Tracey.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to borrow from a friend on LinkedIn who posted something recently saying optimism is a form of defiance. I think by remaining optimistic, but, realistic, I think that's really powerful, and sort of coming up with positive solutions and like offering a practical kind of response to some of these really serious and adverse impacts of climate change, as well as existing conditions that people are living in, fuel poverty and damp and mold in their homes, for example, which are just exacerbated by a flood or a heat wave. It's really it's unthinkable in some of the conditions people are living in this country, and but I think you just have to keep doing good things with good people, and keep joining up the dots between the people who are doing those things, and kind of having events like this, guides like the ones you've prepared, and keep the human focus, the stories about all of these impacts, as well as all of these practical ways out of the mess we are in.
Yeah. Thanks, Polly. Tracey, briefly, how do you bring hope and optimism to your community networks?
I think it's really difficult, isn't it? Because we do see people who live in situations where they may not have many solutions that would be forthcoming. But what we do say to people is try to stay connected with, if you have a flood action group, with your flood action group, stay connected to your loved ones. I think sometimes when we're living in a situation which is very, very difficult, we can become very disconnected, but staying connected is really important. And it's important that we validate their experience, that we accept their experience as their experience, whatever that is. Even if it is perhaps living with, a lack of hope. We also see that sharing between groups and peer-to-peer sharing really supports people. And Polly, I did really like your response around the optimism. So, yeah, but I think it's about really validating their experience and keeping people connected.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I'm going to draw this gently to a close, unless I don't think there's any open questions as far as I can see, but colleagues, you'll shout at me if there are. So just with a few closing words to thank my colleagues, Lachlan, and the rest of the staff at the TCPA. Thank you for all your work on the guides and for today's evening. Thanks to all our speakers who are amazingly inspirational. Actually, I do feel positive. There's a couple of comments there to support that positivity. My only closing remarks about it from a town and parish council or a community point of view is that the founder of the TCPA, Ebenezer Howard, said in the 1897 that, you know, if you wanted to build utopia, you'll be as old as Methuselah if you wait for government to do it for you. That wisdom is actually really true at the moment. So in the face of people saying there's no money and there's no capacity in local government and national government, then communities have to step up. I'm not saying that's right, okay? I'm not saying that it should be like that, but I'm also saying that when communities come together, the benefits that they can produce in terms of their mental health and their connectedness, in terms of having agency over their future, which is really important in that mental health journey, and getting involved is transformational in my view. It really is. It's absolutely transformational. That is the future of this nation, funnily enough. It will be built brick by brick at the community level. So I encourage you not to take no for an answer. I encourage you not to wait for government. I encourage a great deal of kindness and connection, a great deal of patience and effort. And I absolutely condemn you not to give up in all your workplaces, all your communities. Thank you so much for attending it. Please look out for other TCPA events. We all hope, I think, as staff, that there'll be more guides. I really hope there are, and more work in this space. Please support the TCPA if you can, because I can tell you we need it. Thank you so much again to all our speakers. Thank you and good night.
Thank you. Good night.